Hey everyone! Instead of deciding on one record to review for now, I decided to try something a little different. I think a lot of us have different preferences for what kind of music we listen to around this time of year, so I thought I'd share some of my personal favorite records to go back to around this Halloween season. Some of these will seem pretty obvious, I'm sure, but I'm hoping I'll surprise you with a few others as well. Now, keep in mind, not all of these are specifically Halloween themed, but just the albums and releases that personally get me into the spirit of things. So without further ado, let's check them out. First, I'll start with the more family-friendly ones. Ever since I first got it, I've loved pulling out my old copy of Disney's The Haunted Mansion here. Not only does it tell the entire story behind the ride, which you also hear at the actual Disney World attraction itself, but it's also got all of the creepy and atmospheric music that brings the whole thing together. Oh, and this particular release, if you didn't see my other video featuring this once, also comes with an entire storybook talking all about the history of the haunts and the ride itself, and it is beautiful with beautiful illustrations. There you can see the famous hitchhiking ghosts right here. Unfortunately, Disney stopped putting out this particular release years ago, but they do currently sell a picture disc version of it without the book on their Music Emporium site, should you be so inclined. Next up is another Disney release, though this one may be a little less obvious to some. I went with the soundtrack to Fantasia. Now that you've seen that I picked this, you may already have a major guess as to why. Yes, the final segment of the movie, there's a picture from it, with Chernabog and Night on Bald Mountain playing, is easily one of my favorite animation sequences of all time. This particular arrangement of the song was also very, very well done, in my opinion, just making me want this even more. But it's also got Toccata and Fugu in D minor, which is another must-listen for this time of year, let's face it. Fans of horror will probably recognize this one right away, as part of its main theme was used in the movie The Exorcist. Yes, it's Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. Even if you exclude its use in The Exorcist, it's still a brilliant piece of music with all kinds of creativity behind it. It's hard to believe that Mike put this out when he was only 19 years old, especially considering the album had over, I looked this up, 274 overdubs in it. That's something I can't even fathom putting together now, let alone back then. Bravo, Mike. Just bravo. Next up is going to be a pretty obvious one, but that doesn't make it any less fitting. The soundtrack to Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Yes, this is easily a personal favorite of mine. Danny Elfman created something truly beautiful and memorable with this soundtrack, and practically raised an entire generation of Hot Topic kids with it too. That's something never to be taken lightly. Classic. Speaking of Danny Elfman, some people tend to forget that he was also in the 80s band Oingo Boingo. While this album, Dead Man's Party, isn't particularly Halloween-y, I always associated its themes with Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos, personally, but the vibes you get from it more than compensate. I mean, it's fantastical, yet down-to-earth, all at once, especially with songs like No One Lives Forever. I remember the first time I discovered this group, many years after seeing The Nightmare Before Christmas, and thinking to myself, wow, Jack Skellington was in an 80s band? Sold! It's an excellent album. And hey, it's got Weird Science at the end of it, so you can't go wrong. This next one isn't actually music, but rather an old radio broadcast. The original War of the Worlds broadcast, to be exact. Yes, this is the infamous radio show that was said to have caused a nationwide panic at the time of its first airing in 1938. Whether or not that's actually true is still debated, but the broadcast is very fun all the same. Orson Welles was a master at narrating suspenseful stories, and this was no exception. It's perfect for when you want to relive this spooky and fun part of radio history. Moving on from the family-friendly aspects, let's go into something a little darker. Next up is a big one for the punk community, as it really got the horror punk theme going. The Misfits album, Walk Among Us. It's a little shiny there, because I still got the shrink wrap on it. While the material in Static Age was technically made earlier, this was the first album to get an official release, and pretty much became a staple after that. Between Danzig's raw vocal style, combined with the many horror themes and other disturbing imagery, just makes this one a must for the season. These next albums mostly fall into the rock and metal category, as I feel that these are also perfectly suited for the holiday. The first one is an oldie but a goodie. There are many albums in Black Sabbath's catalog I could have gone with here, but I always found their self-titled debut to be the more atmospheric of the bunch, with songs like Black Sabbath itself, for example, leading the way. The melody for The Wizard is also basically stuck in my head forever. The next one is a classic from Iron Maiden, The Number of the Beast. While it is not my personal favorite album of theirs, that honor still goes to Powerslave, just my opinion. This one always manages to get me in the October mood more than just about any of their other releases. Now, that could be because I first heard it in October many years ago, but who knows? Either way, with songs like Invaders, Children of the Damned, the title track, and Hallowed Be Thy Name, it's hard not to get into the Halloween mood with it. As for this next one, well, it's practically in the name, and I happen to be wearing a shirt for it today. That is Helloween, Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 1. While you could easily put both Parts 1 and 2 here, because they're both amazing power metal releases, I gave the nod to Part 1 simply because of the actual song, Halloween. Over here on side 2, there you go. Halloween is a surprisingly long and epic track, hitting all the right beats with me, and just being another great contender all around. It's just excellent. Speed and atmosphere. What more could you ask for in a bunch of fast dudes with long hair? This next one is a little less metal, though it's still associated with metal, whether people like it or not. I picked Ghost's first album, Opus Anonymous. I've heard every album and EP release from this band so far, but I always found myself coming back to this debut release. It was a really neat mix of basically Blue Oyster Cult meets devil-worshipping metal of the 70s, even if it's pretty clear the whole thing is strictly an act. Quick story about Ghost, since everybody's talking about them now. I've actually seen them live twice now, but opening for other bands. I never went with them as the main act before. The first time I saw them, they were opening for an Opeth and Mastodon tour, and I had never heard of them up until that point. From the minute that they started up, everyone in the audience just simply couldn't help but stare wide-eyed at everything going on. At the time, we only saw the singer in full-on Pope garb with upside-down crosses on it, skeleton face paint, slowly prancing around the stage, all with his cloak out, with strobe lights going off, and fake stained glass windows set up behind them, all while Papa, as they call him, was inviting us to partake in his ritual. Outside of maybe King Diamond himself, I don't think I've ever seen a show quite like it since. I'll also show you the record for this one really quick, as it was a pretty colored golden release. There you go. Well, kind of golden. They said it was gold. Still looks nice. And speaking of King Diamond, I pretty much had to include him here as well. It's tough to pick just one album of his, but in the end, I went with Abigail. This one has always been my personal favorite of his, and getting to see him perform it back in 2015 was one of the most surreal metal experiences I have ever had. This whole release is a concept album, and while the story is a bit too involved to really dive into here, know that it is completely dark and twisted, and right up there with horror movies in its creativity. I understand why he's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, considering his falsetto voice that people either seem to love or hate, and the fact that he's, an actual Satanist. But if you're a metalhead willing to look past all that and just give this band an album a fair shot, I think you would be fairly impressed as well. As this is technically another band, although King Diamond is still included in it, I decided to include a Merciful Fate album too. While I still think that Melissa may be the best album of theirs to actually start with, I have always found Don't Break the Oath to be their actual best, period. Even with some of the, what I'll call 80s production values, this album still manages to stand out. You know the dark and satanic lyric styles that you tend to hear in black metal to this day? This band was one of the main inspirations for it, despite this actually being more of a straightforward heavy metal release with progressive elements thrown in it. Another must-listen for metalheads everywhere. And last, but certainly not least, who could forget? Slayer's Rain in Blood. I have heard people refer to Slayer as the musical equivalent of a horror movie, and I couldn't agree more with that statement. Extremely dark and disturbing lyrics thrown in with all kinds of other fast and shocking moments, especially in songs like Angel of Death, and you've got yourself one hell of a Halloween headbanger on your hands. Personally, they're not my favorite band by a long shot, but I cannot deny that when I am in just the right mood for it, this album completely hits that thrash metal spot. Okay, so now that I've gone from Disney to devil worshipping, why don't you tell me what your favorite picks are for the Halloween season as well? And thank you all for watching so much, and I hope you all have a very happy Halloween. Take care.